And now tonight we are, as we continue on our study in the Old Testament, we are at point number 11 out of the 15. We are at rejection, okay? So we've got just a few more weeks after this, and we're going to be done with the Old Testament, and you're going to be an Old Testament scholar, and you can teach anybody in the world, right? Got it. I believe in you. And so once again, these key words kind of help us remember what all these different things come together. And so God created the world, and He created everything, the heavens and the earth, by speaking into existence. It was created good. It was created wonderful. It was created for His glory. And as He created Adam and Eve, they rebelled against Him, and there was a fall of mankind that took place. That fall happened. They were kicked out of the garden. Sin entered the world. Curse entered the world. Even death entered into the world. And as Adam and Eve left the garden, they had kids like Cain and Abel, and sin continued to increase throughout their lives, and it got worse and worse and worse until God one day said, enough is enough, and I'm going to send a flood to come and wake you guys up to know that sin does bear punishment. Sin has consequences. There is death that comes upon this. And even through that, yet there was a remnant that remained as Noah and his family repopulated the earth. Then eventually we get to the man by the name of Abram that God made a covenant with and said, I'm going to bless you, so that all the families of all the nations of the earth will be blessed because of someone that's going to come from your family. And so Abram has Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. Jacob has a bunch of kids. And one of those kids is placed into Egypt. His name was, you might remember? Joseph, right? And so Joseph goes into Egypt in bad circumstances, but also Joseph saw it, that God was orchestrating all these events to get him in the second place of the highest authority in all the land, so that he could make sure that the people of God would have been cared for. And so when the nation of Israel, the family of Israel, is struck with famine, they come to Joseph. Joseph cares for them. He provides for them. Then all of Israel moves into Egypt. Hundreds of years later, the Pharaoh does not know Israel, does not know Joseph, does not know Jacob, and could care less about anything other than protecting his own hide. And so he enslaves all the Israelites. And things get so bad to them that the Israelites call out to God and ask for help. And God is happy to oblige. And through a series of 10 plagues, God makes Pharaoh bow his knee to them, and there's an exodus that takes place. And God's people get out of Egypt, and they start working their way to the promised land. After they are free, after they are redeemed, after they are His people, God gives them commandments. And He gives them commandments and says, now that you are my people, now that I am your God, I want you to start living like my people. I want you to start living like I am your God. And so I have some rules I want you to follow. They did not keep them so well. In fact, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years because they could not keep these commandments. And so through that, they wandered. They saw so many things in that generation that left Egypt. For the most part, besides two guys, were not going to make it in there. Joshua and Caleb were going to make it into the land of Canaan, which we also know as the Promised Land. And Joshua led this group as a military leader to take the land, to get rid of all the idols, to take back and say, this is going to be a land that God has preserved for us. And yet what happened is that instead of getting rid of all of the idol factories that were there, they kept a few of them up. And eventually those idols made its way into their hearts and into the society. And a cycle took place in the little span of the Judges. As you look at the book of Judges, the cycle would take place as the people would sin. Then God would have enough and He would send suffering. And then as they would suffer, there would be something called supplication, which is prayer, ask God to help. And then there would be salvation through the hand of a judge like Gideon or Samson or Deborah or somebody like this to help. And as soon as they got saved, as soon as they got good again, guess what they did? Came back to the top and started sinning again. And the cycle just continues. Which brings us today to rejection, which is, as we look at this passage, you see that those first couple sentences there on your page. Since the people got stuck in a cycle of sin during the time of the Judges, it showed the need for a stable leader. Instead of relying on God or a godly leader, the people rejected the model of a king that they needed. And so let's look at this. The first thing when it says the rejection of Yahweh, once again, Yahweh is the covenantal name for God. So when God speaks out of the bush and says, I am who I am, that Hebrew word is translated as Yahweh. Some people would call it Jehovah. That's kind of the same name, or different name, but for the same God there. As we look at the rejection of Yahweh, Judges 21:25 sets the stage. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So this is the way the end of the book of Judges takes place. Judges just sets it. You got all these guys have gone through this, all these tribal conflicts, all these incredible things that happen, and yet it sets the stage. The last verse of it says, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Now, I want you, I told you to turn to 1 Samuel. I want you to go back a few pages to the end of Judges. Judges chapter 21. And you're going to see that verse, and I want you to see kind of the way that the Old Testament is put together. Because when you look through this narrative, some of you are going to notice, like, hey, we really don't talk about Ruth, or we really don't talk about Job. Like, why are we missing some of these people? And we'll mention some of them as we pass by, but this is kind of the big picture narrative history. But as you look and you see that it says, in those days there was no king in Israel, everyone did what was right in his own eyes, and the book ends. That's kind of a sad way to end a book, isn't it? It's kind of like, wow, that sounds really bad. Everybody did what was right in their own eyes. Does that sound like a time in history that you know of? Maybe. Just whatever's right in your own eyes, you decide what's true, what's not true, what's good, what's bad, what not. That's kind of picture. Now, when you're at Judges 21, I want you to take a right turn, and what book do you see next? Ruth. Book of Ruth. Some of you might know this story. This is one of, out of the 66 books, there are 2 books that have a woman's name attached to it. One is Ruth, the other is? Esther. That's right, great. So you see this, and Ruth is an interesting story that is not the kind of story that I'm going to teach my daughter how to get a man from. Okay, that's not what this story is about. In fact, there's some subject stuff about how all this happens, and Ruth is going to lose a husband, and then all of a sudden her mother-in-law is like, hey, that's a good one right there, and he's like, okay, and Boaz is taking a nap one day, and then Ruth's sitting there at him, and he said, what are we doing here? Are we having a prayer Bible study? What is this, right? And she is making herself known that she would like to be with him, and Boaz is this kinsman redeemer, and it is this picture of Christ. There's some beautiful imagery going on in some sense, but also here's I think the point of Ruth. Go to the chapter 4. Why is this tiny little book in here about 2 star-crossed lovers finding each other and getting married? Why is this book in here? Look at Ruth chapter 4, verse 18. You might have a subheading that says something about the genealogy of David. There you go. Why is Ruth most likely included in the narrative of Scripture? Well, the way they end it tells you why. There's some beautiful imagery, some beautiful things as it points to Christ, but look at these last verses. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. Great. Well, that's a great way to end. And they all lived happily ever after, right? That's the way that he ends his story. Why does he end his story there? Because this is pointing out something very particular to say. God is using some extreme things to put his family together. He's using people from suspect past and all kinds of messed up things, and he's bringing his family together, and it's pointing towards a king that God is going to say David was a man after what? God's own heart. That's kind of what he's going after here. And so I believe that Ruth is kind of in that in the narrative of Scripture to show that lineage. And then you turn the page over one more time, and where do you get? 1 Samuel. Now let's look at this here. The next line on your notes there, Samuel has miraculous birth and is given into service of the Lord. Samuel, and this is going to start off these books that bear his name. He's not going to be the main character here in a few chapters, but that's what we call it, 1 and 2 Samuel. And Samuel has miraculous birth, is given into service of the Lord. His mother is a lady by the name of Hannah. She cannot have children. She goes to the temple one day, and she is praying, and she is crying out to God. And it's one of those times that it's very, very difficult. Look, actually go to chapter 1, verse 12. Actually, go to verse 11. Sorry. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli took her to be a drunken woman. And Eli said to her, how long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you. This is just funny. It's kind of at the altar, right? He's just, Hannah answered, no, my Lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. Then Eli answered, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him. And she said, let your servant find favor in your eyes. Then the woman went away and ate, and her face was no longer sad. And the next part of this story is that she goes home and she actually becomes pregnant. And she has prayed this, saying, God, if I have this child belongs to you. I just want to be able to have this child. And so when this child is enough at the age where she does exactly what she promised to do. Look at verse 26. She sees Eli comes up and says, oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I'm the woman who is standing here in your presence praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore, I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord there. And then chapter 2 is this wonderful worship song that Hannah just begins to pray. And it really mirrors another woman who sings another worship song in the New Testament about a coming birth. Does anybody know who that is? Mary. If you look at Hannah's prayer, it's a lot like Mary's prayer. Lord, who am I for this to happen, this wonderful birth? This is a gift. I give them to you. Do what you need to do. I mean, just these beautiful prayers in this. And so here's this picture of this woman who wants a child so much that she says, God, I'm going to make a deal with you. If you'll give me a child, this child is yours. So it's interesting to me that I had always, I knew part of my family's story growing up, but didn't know all the parts of it. So my parents, for some of you that are new here, my parents were divorced when I was 4, and so grew up in just a single parent household, my mom and my sister. But it was years later where I got to a place where I felt a call to the ministry at age 14. I didn't know what that meant at all. I just knew that I felt like that's what I needed to do, and I told some people, and they affirmed it. And I thought, what do I do now? And I don't know. I just kept walking and following different things. And I remember that my mom told me one day, she says, Travis, I'm very proud of you. I think that's great, but I would really encourage you. Why don't you do some other occupation and just teach Sunday school at church? And I said, Mama, I feel called, though, to do that. She goes, I know. But you got to understand, when you walk into the pastorate, you are always under a microscope, and I don't want that for you. People are going to you never get to clock out. It's going to be like this, and I just don't want that for you. And why don't you just do this and just be a really good member of the church, right? So I struggled with that from 14, 15, 16, 17. I was getting near graduating from high school. Was I going to go to this school, or was I going to get that major? I had money at this school to do this, but am I going to go back and forth and kept whatever? And I was struggling, and one day I told my mom this story. And I just said, Mama, I'm just struggling. I feel like I'm still supposed to do this. She goes, well, I guess I need to tell you something. I said, what? She said, well, you know that the doctors had told me that I wasn't supposed to have a child, right? And I said, well, I knew that. She said, and we almost lost you when you were in, my tummy at that time. And I said, well, I didn't know that, Mom. And she said, and somebody pointed me to 1 Samuel chapter 1 and 2. And I prayed before you were born that, Lord, if I can just have this child belongs to you, and whatever you want from him. And I said, so you mean to tell me I didn't have a choice in this, right? You mean I didn't have a choice? And she goes, well, I just did want you to feel like, pushed in a different direction. But she said, I did pray for this even before you were born, that, Lord, if I can have this child belongs to you, whatever you want to do. And so when I read this story, I'm always moved in a lot of ways, and also just kind of chuckle at how all this came out. I was like, well, Mom, that really helped out when I was trying to declare a major and figure out what school. And thankfully, it was at the right time at this different place. But I say that to also say for every parent and grandparent and aunt and uncle, your prayers make a difference. Your investment make a difference. And for us, I just want the first truths that my children walked away with were the songs that their mama sang to them, I mean, so I just never want you to stop thinking that the stuff that you're investing in those young folks, it's not churning out there. So even if it's slow work, it's hard work, and you feel like somewhat you're behind, you got to trust the process. So the Lord uses so many of these things to do this. And so here's this woman who says, all right, Lord, you gave me this privilege of having this child, and now he's old enough, and now she drops him off with old Eli. He says, all right, Eli, you're going to take care of my boy now in the work of the Lord. So eventually, what we also find out about Eli is that Eli's sons are rejected, and God calls Samuel into service. Eli's sons were not the best of kids. They were the original PKs. Y'all know what I'm talking about when I say PK? Preacher kids. Now, there's a reason, all right. Yeah, y'all three, y'all listen up really strong here. There's a reason some of y'all chuckle whenever you hear PK, because a lot of times, have you ever met a PK that didn't act like a PK? Or you go, well, no, they acted like a PK, right? Okay, but they didn't act like what you thought a PK should be. Is that fair? And there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of reason that kind of stuff can happen. But this is the original section here. Look at chapter 2, verse 12. He says it this way. Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. Well, that summarizes it for you. Tell me about your sons. They're worthless. They just got nothing. They don't know the Lord. In fact, the way this is supposed to happen is that Eli is supposed to pass on that ministry to his sons. But his sons are actually doing some scandalous stuff in the temple, or the tabernacle and around that area of worship, and it's known. And so this is what's crazy about it, is that as you look through it, let me look through, when you watch through this, if you continue to go through this, what's interesting is that he tells Eli, he says, your sons aren't going to be able to do this priestly duty, and in fact, I'm going to punish you for your sins because you knew about their sins and didn't do anything about it. And you know what's interesting when he describes it? These are grown men. It's not they were 4 years old or 16 years old. These are grown men, and Daddy Eli's not stepping up and say, hey boys, hey, you may be independent and everything, but I'm still your old man and I will wear you out. He's not doing that. And God holds him accountable, that even as an adult father to his adult sons, he's saying, you still have a voice to speak. You still need to say the truth to them. And some of you parents with adult kids, have you ever had that tension? You've had it before. I know I can't send you to your room, but boy, I wish I could, right? And so he has this moment where they're supposed to share this. Well, so if you go to 1 Samuel chapter 3, is the passage of Scripture where God calls Samuel. 1 Samuel 3, verse 1. Let me just read a couple verses out of this. It says, now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no frequent vision. That's a picture, isn't it? Now Samuel is a boy, and he's ministering to the Lord. And yet, what's interesting is, look down at verse 7. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. So you mean to tell me that somebody could be ministering for the Lord before he actually knows him? Wow. Apparently. He's doing religious work, but he just doesn't know the one he's talking to. And so that could be a danger sign for a whole lot of us. Busy in religious work, but he doesn't know the Lord yet. And so that night, God calls on him. Says, Samuel, Samuel. He jumps up, goes in down the hallway, goes, yes, sir, Eli, did you call me? Eli's in him. He's a grumpy old man at this point. I didn't call you. Go back to bed. What are you talking about, boy? He goes down, whatever, and then all of a sudden, Samuel lies down again. Samuel, he called me again. He's going crazy. He's forgetting what he's doing. Gets up. Did you call me, sir? No, I didn't call you. Go back to bed. Third time it happens, and all of a sudden, Eli goes, uh-oh. That might be the Lord talking. He goes, what do? He goes, whatever he says. If you hear that voice again, you say, speak, for your servant is listening. And that night, voice comes in. He says, speak, for your servant is listening. And God calls on calls on Samuel. Look at verse 11. He says, behold, I'm about to do a thing in Israel at which the two ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. On that day I will fulfill against Eli of all that I've spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. And I declare to him that I'm about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them. Therefore I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever. Samuel lay until morning. Then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord, and Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. But Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son? He said, here I am. Eli said, what was it that he told you? Do not hide it from me. May God do so to you and more if you hide anything from me. All he told you. So Samuel told him everything, hid nothing from him. And he said, yep, that's the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him. And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. And so this transition of power is Eli is passing down that mantle to Samuel the priest, who is leading the people. And so as they are conducting worship and leading people to God, something tragic happens among the people. The Philistines capture the Ark of the Covenant. And once Israel recovers it, Samuel confronts Israel. So we're going to have to move through some of these passages really quick. But the Philistines capture the Ark. And what happens here is that as they capture the Ark, they think that because every time Israel wins a battle, it's because of that big shiny box in front of them. So the Philistines go, we want us a big shiny box in front of us. So they steal the box, and then they go put it in their temple next to their big old statue that they worship. And they lock it in there, and they go, all right, now we're going to win some battles. And then the next day, that statue's just down on the ground. That's weird. Prop it back up, pull that thing way back up there. They get in there the next morning, that thing is down on the ground, and his head is off. And they go, that's kind of a coincidence. He's never fallen until now, until that box has been in there. And then all of a sudden, people start getting sick. They're starting losing all kinds of stuff. People are dying, and they finally said, how about y'all have this box back? Philistines return it. And then Samuel's going to confront them, chapter 7. Look at verse 3. They get the ark back. And for 20 years, it sort of sits on the shelf, collecting dust. And it says, and Samuel said to all the house of Israel, if you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods, the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your heart to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So the people of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and they served the Lord only. So he says, look, it's time for us to wake up. We've got to really, really be serious here about this. But what takes place next, after he has this moment as the leader, is very pivotal in the life of Israel. After this event, Israel rejects Yahweh and demands an earthly king. They are going to look at God and say, we want a king like everybody else does. If you go down, in fact, I didn't write these verses down for you, but I want you to write chapter 8, verse 5. Chapter 8, verse 5. And we're going to read this together. In fact, go to verse 1. It says, when Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second, Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Here we go again. A priest figure not taking care of his own kids. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, behold, you are old. I just love how gracious people are, right? Behold, you are old. Your sons are not walking your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. Did you catch that? We want to be like them. Like who? Like the Philistines. They got them a king. We want a king too. Samuel's going to push back at these next verses. In fact, it says Samuel's upset. He is very upset. I mean, it's verse 6, but the king, this thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. Samuel prayed to the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, obey the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected who? Me, for being king over them. God sees this as a direct assault upon his provision and authority over their lives. So let me ask you this. Has God protected the Israelites? Has he provided for them? Has he been a commander-in-chief for them? He has served every capacity of king better than any mortal man could do. And they go, yeah, but we want us a king. We want us a man. Why? Because all the other nations have one. Oh, you mean all the other nations that we beat by a trumpet blast and walking around their buildings? You mean those nations? Oh yeah, we walk around their buildings, yell really loud, and their walls come tumbling down. You want to be like them. Is that who you want to be like? Yeah, exactly. They got them a king, and he's got a robe, and people like blow trumpets and stuff. Like, that's what we want. And so Samuel's mad. And he's just upset because Samuel sees him. I've been leading these people in kind of religious stuff, right? And God goes, they're not rejecting you, boy. They're rejecting me. They're rejecting me as serving as king over them. I've been doing this for hundreds of years now, and I'm not enough for them. Verse 8, according to all the deeds that they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they're also doing to you. Now then, obey their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them. Y'all ready for this speech? This is great. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. And he said, These be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands, and commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground, and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war, and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers, and cooks, and bakers. He will take the best of your fields, and vineyards, and olive orchards, and give them to his servants. He will take the tenth of your grain. He's going to tax you, and your vineyards, and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants, and the best of your young men, and your donkeys. Oh, now he's talking serious. Listen, and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your flocks. You shall be his slaves, and in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, no, but there shall be a king over us, that we may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go up before us and fight our battles. When Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, obey their voice. Make them a king. Samuel then said to the men of Israel, go, every man to his city. Now, when I hear people talk about the Old Testament, this passage gets a lot of times glossed over. I think this is one of the most pivotal passages in the entire Bible. Because here's people saying, we want a king who fights before us. And you go, you've had him at every step of the way. And he has been blowing up the enemy by the breath of his nostrils. And you want a king like the weak Philistines? That's what you want? Yes, this is exactly what you want. And Samuel says, all right, he's going to tax you. He's going to take your best land. He's going to take the best of your flock. You're going to have to work in ways that you don't want to work. You're going to be advancing his agenda. And they go, bring it. That's exactly what we want. He goes, okay. Now you see how a government system works here? I mean, Samuel laid it out pretty well, doesn't he? The stuff that we complain about, government and all this kind of stuff and taxation, he lays it out perfectly well for us to see this. And so let's talk about the first king here and how this comes up. First king is not a king by the name of David. It's a king by the name of who? Saul is that first guy. Okay, so in King Saul, Israel gets exactly the type of king they desired and exactly what they do not need. Exactly what they do not need. So look at chapter 9, verse 2. I'm going to show you what the people of Israel loved about this man. Y'all ready? He had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. From his shoulders upward, he was, what is that again? Taller than any other people. He's just tall. He's just tall and good looking. Let's follow that guy. Because that always works out really, really well, right? What are your qualifications? I am tall and good looking, okay? That was the qualifications. And in fact, when they start just completely going, when they see this guy, they just go bananas over him because they'll say, look how tall he is. His head is over our shoulders. Look, that's awesome how tall he is. Of course he needs to be king. I mean, this is the wisdom of the world, folks. This is the wisdom of us saying, let's look at those physical characteristics and think if that leader needs to be there or not. And so they are just so excited about all these different things. They'll go through all these different verses and they keep talking about it. And yet, what happens is that they're going to base this on he's from a rich family, he's tall, he's handsome, but let's just remember that what happens is, so he does come into the kingship. God and Samuel, they anoint him as that king. And it's almost like, if you read through all these verses, it's almost like God going, so you want a tall one, huh? All right. Yeah. Let's make the tall guy your king. Watch this, guys. It's going to be awesome. All right. Let's anoint him as king. Let's see how this works out, guys. We'll use your wisdom for this one. Yeah, that's right. We'll use your wisdom. Let's get the tall guy. So they bring Saul in, and Saul starts doing some things. There's some moments where Saul looks like he can be a good king. There's a lot of moments that looks like he's not going to be a good one. In fact, before a battle, Saul grows impatient, waiting on Samuel to offer sacrifices, so he performs the priestly duty himself. 1 Samuel 13, now Samuel's getting old. He's not moving as fast as he used to. And he's ready to go into battle. Samuel's not there yet. Have you ever heard the phrase that power corrupts? And absolute power corrupts? Absolutely. And what happens is this man who's got all the power in the world all of a sudden he doesn't think he has to listen to what God's word says about who gets to offer the sacrifices and who gets to lead worship, and that he needs to wait on Samuel. So guess what he does? He just takes matters into his own self. Good thing none of us ever do that, right? When God isn't moving fast enough. Look what happens here. Verse 8, it says he waited 7 days, the time appointed by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from him. So Saul said, bring the burnt offering here to me and the peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. And as soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. Isn't that about the timing, right? Here he shows up. Here he shows up. Now he's at this place. So he goes ahead, he disobeys, but as a result of disobedience, Samuel tells Saul that his house will not retain the throne and that God is raising someone else up who is a man after his own heart. He promises him this at that battle site, right there, that worship site where he bends the rules because he thinks that he can do it. He tells him very, very clearly, your kingship is going to be gone. Verse 13, he says, for then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. Verse 14, here it goes. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. So you guys sought after a man after physical stature, tallness. I'm going to search after somebody who's after my own heart. And I've already picked him out to be king. So what do you think Saul starts doing? Starts looking around to see who is this guy who's going to come and challenge him, right? And so this is what we're going to find out about who this king is after his own heart. It's not Saul, but it's going to be who? It's going to be David. You go over to chapter 16 and we realize this. That God leads Samuel to anoint the next king at the house of a man named Jesse. And no, Jesse is not in Alabama. He is in, whenever I see that, I'm like, Jesse just doesn't sound like an Old Testament Hebrew name, does it? Okay? And go to Jesse's house. All right. Go to Jesse. 1 Samuel chapter 16. The Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him for being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite. So he's from the city of where again? Y'all ever know a king is going to come from Bethlehem again? I have provided for myself a king among his sons. And Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me. The Lord said, well, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. And invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. And you shall anoint for me whom I declare to you. Samuel did what the Lord commanded and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came to meet him trembling and said, do you come peaceably? And he said, peaceably, I've come to sacrifice the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to me with sacrifice. He consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, here we go, ready? Surely the Lord's anointed is before him. Samuel, what are you doing? You're making the same mistake that all these other guys. Look at this kid. Man, he is sharp. This has got to be a king, right? Look at him. Look what God says, verse 7. Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. There's a lot of people that can have an outward appearance that seems noble in leadership, but it can hide a whole lot of ugly, can't it? I mean, a lot of deceit there. He goes, don't look at how tall he is. That's a waste of your time. Don't look at how physically impressive he is. I'm not after that. I don't win battles by what the world says I win them. I do what I need to do. And so what happens is that Jesse brings out his sons, the most impressive first, since these would be the obvious choice. So he starts at the tallest and the oldest. He goes, all right, what about this one? And then he brings out the next one. What about this one? What about this one? And it continues on, and yet none of them seem like that they're the right choice. So he brings out the most impressive first, and then look what happens next. Samuel tells Jesse that God does not look at the outward appearance like men do, but he does look at the heart. So we get that. We understand, and yet something takes place here that is such an interesting kind of change in this narrative, because God has been telling him it's in this house. Samuel's going down the whole family roster, and God keeps saying, nope, 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 nope. And then Samuel's finally going to say, is there anybody else? And what happens is that David is the youngest son who works as a shepherd, and Samuel is going to anoint him as king. Now, can you imagine, older brothers and sisters, God's going to choose the baby of the family, the shepherd. Now, we know that whenever we see the word shepherd in the Bible, God's up to something, right? A lot of times. But was shepherd a noteworthy kind of vocation that you want to go after? No. It was not a good one at all. In fact, look what happens in verse 11. It says, then Samuel said to Jesse, are all your sons here? And he said, there remains yet the youngest, but behold, he is keeping the sheep. Do you catch what he's just saying? I'm not even calling his name yet. I'm just saying, yeah, there's the young one. The runt litter's there. But he's out with the sheep, Samuel. So, not going to work. It's not going to work. Samuel said to Jesse, send and get him, for we will not sit down until he comes here. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, had beautiful eyes, and was handsome. Oh, here we go again, right? And the Lord said, arise and anoint him, for this is he. And Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. And Samuel rose and went to Ramah. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord came and tormented him. Now, at this point, what's crazy is that he is anointed as king, but yet he has not accepted this position yet. So, actually, David is anointed before he is appointed. Okay? So God is confirming something on him before he actually has the position. And that's important for us to remember, because in our context, we always think we got to have the position. And God goes, no. If I call you to it, you're going to get there eventually. But it may not be tomorrow. But just realize this, when Samuel poured that flask of oil over David, it was a done deal. God had promised it. It was anointed. It happened. It hadn't been appointed yet. It wasn't exactly out there. But what happens is that Saul is going to come alongside and going to be overwhelmed by this spirit. And somebody comes up to him and says, you know what? You're going to need to get somebody on your side that's going to help you out. And why don't you get a musician that'll help you? You know, sometimes music will calm everybody. And they go, I know a guy who plays a killer harp. Man, he's awesome. Okay, bring that kid in here. Who is he? Well, his name's David. Okay, well, great. So David is now in the court getting to know Saul. And we get to this place that as we look at this, David works in King Saul's court by playing music for him. He's kind of the musician in the bunch, and he plays there in the king's court, trying to get Saul to kind of calm down and get his anxiety under control. And the reason why I'm calling this section God and Goliath is we normally call it what? David and Goliath. But really, who wins this battle here, folks? It is God. But I want us to see something and how interesting this is, because now remember, why did Israel want Saul to be king? Because he was really what? Tall and handsome. Okay? And what do we know about Goliath? He's really tall. Now, isn't that ironic? That God has allowed these people an enemy that they have based all their strength in. Our king is strong because he's tall. Oh, really? So you want a tall drink of water rather than the King of Kings and Lord of Lords? That's what you want? That's right. That's what we want. Okay, this will be great. And Goliath is raised up for this moment. I mean, you may not think about it this way. Goliath has been raised up to be a monstrosity of a freak of nature for this moment, to remind the people, your strength is not in your own self. It is in God. It is in God. And so what happens is that when the Philistines come against Israel for war, they send out a giant named Goliath to challenge any Israelite, and no one would face him. No one would face him, including who? Tall Saul. What's he doing? He's hanging out in his tent, scared to death, shaking in his little armor, hoping he's just going to go away. And he can hear him. Who come out here and fight me? And Saul's like, not me. I'm too important. I don't want to ruffle up my robe. You know what I'm saying? I just got this from the dry cleaner. Got to keep everything nice and pressed. And this is the place. So the way these kind of battles would work is that they're in this valley, and the Israelite army's up on this top, the Philistines' army at this top, and basically the way this kind of battle would work is you send both of your best soldiers out there, you let them duke it out, MMA kind of style, right? You let them go at it, and whoever wins that battle, the whole team gets the battle, right? It's basically like just kind of and not only that, it not only represents the country, but it represents the God that they serve. So this is kind of a unique battle setting that they're going to get into. And so Goliath continues to call out. Look at verse 8 of chapter 17. It says, he stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, why have you come up to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Scared to death. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? We can't beat this guy. Well, David comes to observe the battle lines and becomes shocked that no one would challenge Goliath. He comes down, he's going to check on his brothers. His brothers are in the army. Here comes little shepherd boy. David got some Lunchables ready for him from their mama, right? They're hungry on the battle line. Let me take care of you. Hey, how's everything going? What are you doing here, shepherd boy? We don't need you over here. Well, what's going on? Why didn't anybody fight? And I thought there'd be a battle. No, we're waiting for somebody to step up to that big guy down there, right? He's just literally yelling at us, tormenting us, and nobody will fight him. And David goes, what guy? The big giant right down there in the valley. And then this is what happens. Ready for this? Look at, let's see here what verse this is. He goes down there, verse 24. All the men of Israel, when they saw, verse 23. As he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before, but get this, and David heard him. Now this is a pretty beautiful way that this is written here. Goliath has been saying the same message every day. Same message, day in, day out. Somebody want to come down here and fight me? I'm asking the people of Saul, come down here and fight me. I defy your ranks. I want this. Who will come fight me? You can be my servants, or we can be your servants, however this want to be. He said the same message every day, except one thing was different that day. A man of God heard it. And David goes, what did he just say? Well, he's invoking the name of his God and basically demeaning our God and basically saying his God's better than our God. And David's going, and none of you have fought him? Nobody. And they said, have you seen the size of this man? And David's saying, have you seen the size of our God? All right. Have you seen the size of him? Where are you, boys? And nobody's moving. Nobody is moving at all. And so this is what happens. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, they fled from him. Were much afraid. The men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel, and the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. And David said to the man who stood by him, well, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living who? He's been defying the armies, not of God, but of who did Goliath keep saying? Army of Saul. And David goes, those aren't Saul's army. This is God's army. He says, so what's going to happen if I go up this? And once again, when he says uncircumcised Philistine, he's throwing a little bit of a jab there. We have a relationship with the one true God. We've got covenantal proof that we belong to him. Who is this joker down here who don't even know God to yell at us? People answered him in the same way. So shall it be done to the man who kills him. Now Eliab, y'all remember Eliab? Tall oldest brother. His eldest brother heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David and said, why have you come down? With whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? You don't even have a lot of them, David. Only got a few of them, right? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. David said, what have I done now? Was it not but a word? Doesn't this sound like your child home going home? Like you're just like, man, this sounds like us just arguing and fussing and fighting. And he turned away from him toward another and spoke in the same way. The people answered him again as before. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And it says, and David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he's been a man of war from his youth. Still looking at the outside. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father. When there came a lion or a bear, I took a lamb from the flock, I went after him, struck him, and delivered him out of his mouth. If he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, all right, the Lord who delivered from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said to David, go and the Lord be with you, because I sure am not, right? you go and you fight him, but I'm not going to do this. Here's what's going on, guys. David interprets this challenge as a man defying Yahweh and not threatening another warrior, and that is why he wants to fight. Right there. He wants to fight. He wants to come alongside because he's not threatening another warrior. He sees him as defying God himself. And this is why David has had enough. And this is why he's going to step up. Verse 38, then Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor, and he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off. Just stop right there. Some of us are trying to walk around in other people's armor and trying to figure out why we can't get things going. God hadn't called you to certain things, and you're trying to put something on that belongs to somebody else, and you can't get things working because it wasn't supposed to be. Never was. David's small. David haven't ever worked with this kind of armor, and he's trying to do this. It's clunky, and it's not working. It's made for Saul. And you know what? Saul needs to keep that. He stays in his tent, and he hides in his armor. All David needs is a few rocks and a slingshot. That's what David wants. Verse 40. So he took a staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. A lot of people ask me, why 5 smooth stones? What do they represent? It may just mean that he could fit 5 smooth stones in his pouch. That's all it means, okay? Don't get too deep in this. It probably just means he couldn't fit a 6th one in there. If I'm going against Goliath, I'm going to put about 23 stones if I can. But if I only got room for 5, I'm going to put 5 in there. It says, the Philistine moved forward and came near to David, with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. This is funny to me. He's like, well, he's a good-looking kid, but what? All right, verse 43. The Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Oh, now it's on. What did you just say? He starts calling on the name of his God and defying David. What is that implying? He's basically saying, my God is bigger than your God, little boy. My God has given me this strength. My God is going to give me your head a little bit. Your God is weak. Look at your army scared to death. My God is strong. Look at how I am. Your God is weak. I will defeat you today to show that my God is bigger than your God. Verse 44. Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day that Lord will deliver you into my hand. I will strike you down and cut off your head. And then I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. Whew. Man, that's a speech right there. And what is David doing? He is rescuing every single person who has ever taught this story to a kid or an adult that says, you need to slay your giant, so just get brave and get a few rocks. Save us from that mentality. This is not a story about you overcoming your fear and doing something triumphant to cause your agenda. This is missional. David just said it. I'm about to defeat you because you've been defying our God in the name of everybody, and that stops right here, right now. All these people are going to know, my God is greater than your God. Right here, right now. This is going to happen. And so with this, at this moment, this bottom level story is not modeling for readers how to conquer giants or to develop bravery. This is part of the top level story of God letting himself be known among all the nations. The Philistines are going to know today. That statue who fell on his face is bowing down before the God of Israel, King of kings and the Lord of lords. And this is happening through David, but there's a much bigger story going on here. When we first started this class, y'all remember I told you that there's a bottom level, a middle level, and a top level to every story you see in the Old Testament. The bottom level are these individual narratives. Joseph is sold into slavery. Abraham marries Sarah. David fights Goliath. But that's the bottom level. There's a middle level that always has to do with God's people. What is this doing to Israel? Where are they going? What does this make? But at the top level, the very top level, every position in this story, there's a God who's working out redemption for all peoples. That's what's happening. So even in this moment, if you look at the bottom level, you go, David was brave. We ought to be brave. David didn't mind fighting his giants. We can fight our giants. Okay, that's great. But is David saying that this battle is about him? No, it's about God. And he says it. Again, look at verse 46. I'm going to do all this stuff to you that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's. This is a missional moment. He is wanting everybody to know, Philistines, you have put your faith in a counterfeit God. I'm going to introduce you to the true one tonight. I'm going to introduce you to him. His name is Yahweh, and he is going to win this battle. And then, so he's letting himself be known among all the nations. And so what happens next? Verse 48. When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, look at this. David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. That's a man's man right there. Now, why is he running? Because he thinks he can take him on by his own strength? No, because he knows who he's rolling with. He knows who he's walking up to battle with. He knows who's got this. So is he going to let me see which way I want to go? He's like, oh, it's on. And he starts running because he knows the battle is the Lord's. I don't know how this is going to come off, but this is going to be awesome. And he just takes off and he runs, he charges towards that battle line. Verse 49, David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, slung it, struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell on his face to the ground. Now that just isn't, I didn't have a slingshot like that when I was a kid. Just like, pew, some like little rock hitting. This is a, when somebody knew how to do this, this is a sling that you were going so fast that you were whipping around and you know at the right time to let this thing go. This isn't just like he hit him with a little pebble. This, when it says it sunk into his forehead, brother left a mark, okay? Like this rock, literally took Goliath to hit the ground, but that's not enough, not at this moment. So David prevailed over the Philistine with the sling of the stone and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. He left that up at the tent with Saul. So then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his own sword, drew it out of his sheath, and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. So you mean to tell me when you put your trust in man and that man falls that you got no more hope? Oh, Israel, maybe you should learn a lesson here. You put all your hope in a tall man, and another tall man put you to shame. And guess what? But there's a great God who's over all of them. Verse 52, the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout, pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from Sharon as far as Gath and Ekron, and the people of Israel came back from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their camp. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem. But he put his armor in his tent. I don't need that stuff anyway, right? As soon as Saul saw David go out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this youth? Abner said, as your soul lives, O king, I don't even know. The king said, inquire whose son the boy is. As soon as David returned from the striking down of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. And if you look over just a few more verses, David and Jonathan is Saul's son, develops this deep friendship. And look down at verse 6. As they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistines, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down his thousands, And David, his tens of thousands. Uh-oh. Y'all see where this is going? This happens that God defeats Goliath by the hands of David, and both of their fame spread. David's fame spreads right after this thing. Now, God does get the credit, but those women dancing in the street, yeah, they're giving Saul some credit. But oh, David, he doesn't just kill thousands. He kills tens of thousands. Now, you can see where this is heading. Real easy. But I want you to get this picture. And the summary of this whole section. The people reject Yahweh because they want a king to look like themselves. God, we've been created in your image, but we want to repay the favor and create you and ours. We want a king that looks like us. We want a king like all the other nations. And God says, what kind of king do you want? We want a tall one. He goes, let's find the tallest one you got. Put your strength in that tall man, and I'm going to send somebody taller that will remind you your strength is not in the outward experiences. Your strength is not in anything that you can come up with. Your strength is in the Lord. And God humbles Saul. He humbles Goliath. And all of a sudden, here's this man after God's own heart, that God has anointed way in the shadows, and now he's before his people, reminding us that God is on a mission so that all people may know that he is king, that he is Lord, and nobody else gets that position on his throne. So, Father, tonight as we look